Hello, Buckeyes. What we're going to do now is talk about step number two, which is talking about our dependent variables. And what we're going to do here is we're going to establish our two dependent variables. Now, previously in the video I recorded earlier, we discussed how we're going to do our manipulations, our independent variable. So what variable we're going to change and look at across three conditions. And that's one piece of what we're looking at, one aspect of research study. The other part is discussing your dependent measures, your outcomes. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this particular video, walking through what the dependent measures are and what you need to do in order to get through the step to achieve this step. So this is something your group's been working on previously, so it should be a good step for us to get into. It should be something you kind of build on from previously, where you're at with your group and thinking about the measures that you're going to look at. We're going to kind of formalize them here in this video, make sure that we're all set. So for your projects, you'll need to include two DVs. So you need to measure two outcomes to see how they're affected by your manipulation. Now, for these two outcomes, one dependent variable should be based on something we read about and studied in our discussion sections before. So something that we're familiar with, something that we know that is affected by ostracism. So for example, you could talk about social pain, so that pain that you experience when someone might leave the interaction or has left the interaction. The basic need satisfaction, so belonging, control, self-esteem, meaningful existence. Negative affect, so how negatively someone's feeling their mood. Aggression was one that we talked about, and for one of the days at least. And we also can measure burdensomeness if you want, both from the perspective of someone else burdening the participant, but also from the perspective of the participant feeling burdensome. So we can go back through those papers that we discussed earlier and think about some of the DVs there that you might be interested in looking at as it relates to your independent variable. So this is the first of our two dependent variables that we need to have, one that you've already talked about, we've already discussed in class. The second dependent variable should be assessing something new, an outcome that we haven't discussed yet. So this is something that wasn't in the literature that we were reading through. It'd be something kind of new and different that you're bringing to the table in terms of investigating your research question. Now, when you choose this variable, you need to make sure it relates to ostracism in some fashion or another. And so what I mean by this is it can be that there's an article that's talked about how ostracism affects this outcome, or it could be an outcome that you're interested in looking at. Maybe there's no research showing how ostracism or social exclusion affects it, but you can make an argument based on that outcome that you're interested in, that variable that you're interested in, that ostracism should have an effect on it. So that's just something that you'll make as a logical argument in the introduction, instead of if you find an article where ostracism or social exclusion leads to that particular outcome, leads to that particular dependent variable being affected. Now with this, when you're going to work with your dependent variables, for each of your dependent variables, you'll need to find an article that includes a scale or a measurement for your dependent variable. So that's kind of one evolution we didn't get a chance to get into prior to spring break, is making sure that you're finding an article that describes and gives the scale for the measurement that you want to use. So to help you out, for the ostracism outcomes, you can let me know what outcome you're interested in, and I'll provide you with the scale and reference. So if you're interested in basic need satisfaction, for instance, I will give you the basic need satisfaction items, and I will give you the reference that you can use for that for your paper. So we'll keep that one a bit simple. For your second dependent variable, the one that's new, you'll need to find a scale and a measure from a paper that you found. And again, keep in mind when you're thinking about what dependent variable you want to use, in both cases, but especially the second one, it has to be something that can be answered through an attached file in an email, because we won't be able to do this in person. You're going to be sending these out to hopefully friends and family that will fill out your questionnaire and send it back. So that's where we're headed with actually collecting the data. So to help out a little bit, let me give you an example of a second DV. So in my example, I'm going to look at a DV that I'm interested in that fits the criteria for a new variable. And the DV I'm interested in looking at is how dehumanized individuals feel after they've gone through a social experience. So by dehumanization, I mean depriving a person the sense of being a member of the interconnected human community. Another more simple way of thinking about this is treating someone less than human. So treating them as if they're an object, if they don't have meaningful characteristics, not letting them be part of kind of this larger human community that we have. And so I was interested in this particular effect and how ostracism might cause differences. So maybe someone leaving the group, going back to my example, would cause them to feel more dehumanized compared to if everyone stay in a group, but maybe ostracism is the most dehumanizing experience someone can go through. And so with my example here, what I want to do is find out an article or find an article that measured dehumanization. And I was able to do that. So I found an article called Excluded from Humanity, The Dehumanizing Effects of Social Exclusion. So pretty straightforward. And from this article, it included a measure of dehumanization. So not only did the definition be included as part of it. But I also then found the measure. So I can now use this measure in my study. So let me actually flip out here and go to the PDF of it. I'll show you where they included their measures. So in this article by Bastian and Haslam, it talks about the dehumanizing effects of social ostracism. Fits very well. It's a new variable that we haven't talked about in class, but it's one that I'm interested in. And so to measure dehumanization, I had to find questions that they asked. And so I was able to do that. I scrolled through the article looking at the methods section. When I got to study 2, I found a section where they had measures that I really, really liked. So in this case, they measured items associated with the attribution of human nature and human uniqueness, and they gave me all the items that they used in their particular study. So here now I have all the items that I need, and I have the scale, and I have a citation, which means that if I was doing this assignment, I would be on the right track and almost be set. In some cases, you might find that the authors referenced a particular survey, a particular set of questions, particular measure, but they didn't include it. You might need to look to see if they had a reference for it. So here they talked about the scale that they developed also in a different paper. They just happen to be including it in this paper as well. Okay, so going back to processing what's going on, we have our example here. Hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer for you. What I want to talk about, what you'll do now, is the steps that you need to do for approval. And so to get approval for the next step, you need to describe 2 DVs that you're interested in investigating for each variable. Okay. As you do this, you can explain how the variable you're interested in relates to social exclusion, to ostracism. Why is this important? So in the case of dehumanization, it shows that ostracism is a way not only makes someone feel excluded, but it starts to make them feel less human, that there's not a connection to them. And we want to talk about how the manipulation will affect your dependent variable. So what pattern of effects do you expect to see when you're comparing those 3 conditions? How are you making that link between your independent and your dependent variable? And so I hinted at this a bit before. I expect individuals who are ostracized to feel the most dehumanized. Maybe when a group member leaves the group, you feel slightly dehumanized, but when everyone's included, you feel pretty good, meaning that the condition of being included is the best, but then compared to someone leaving the group or feeling ostracized, they feel worse in those cases. For that second dependent variable, the new variable you're including, you're going to also need to include the article that you're interested in working with. So what we need to do there is make sure that you're going to include the article so that I can see the measures in the questionnaire that you're using. This will help me make sure that you're on the right track, and it'll help me out later on when we work together to do your data analysis. Okay, so to get approval, when you believe you completed the steps, email me with this information. I'll either provide feedback on how to make revisions if needed. So if you didn't quite answer all those questions, something's not clear, or I'll confirm that you completed the steps successfully and you'll be able to move on to the 3rd step. Again, with this, as you're working on things, don't hesitate to ask me questions. Again, email, chat, I'll see you guys in the classroom, things along those lines. But again, as we're working on all this, I want to remind you guys that the most important thing is to stay safe and healthy, take care of yourselves, and do the things that you need to. So with that being said, take care.